Her name was Mara Quinn. And if you Googled her, you'd find headlines like, youngest woman to take a tech company public. Forbes 40 under 40. The ruthless CEO who never loses. But Google didn't know what she looked like that Tuesday morning, pale, shaking, mascara smeared across her left cheek like a wound, sitting under fluorescent lights in a plastic chair, wearing yesterday's clothes. She had not slept. She had not eaten. And she was about to receive news that would unravel 5 years of carefully constructed armor. But before we get to that, you need to understand what she built. And more importantly, what she destroyed to build it. Mara Quinn grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her mother, Diane, worked double shifts as a nurse. Her father left when Mara was 9, didn't say goodbye, just left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I wasn't built for this kind of life." Mara kept that note. She pressed it flat, tucked it inside a textbook, and carried it through middle school, high school, 2 college scholarships, and an MBA from Wharton. Not because she loved him. Because she was going to prove him wrong. She became everything he was not. Focused. Present. Relentless. She launched her first app at 24 from a rented garage with 3 college friends and 1 broken coffee maker. By 31, her company, a healthcare technology platform called Bridgewell, was valued at $2.3 billion. And then, 3 years after that, she made the decision that would haunt her. She let go of her best friend. Her co-founder. Her person. Jenna Reyes. Mara had fired Jenna in a boardroom full of investors. No warning. No private conversation. Just a termination letter slid across the table in front of 11 suits who had been pressuring Mara to cut the emotional dead weight. Jenna had looked at her, not with anger, but with something far worse. Disbelief. She didn't speak. She just picked up the letter, folded it in half, and walked out. That was 14 months ago. And now, Mara Quinn was sitting in a hospital waiting room. Because Jenna Reyes had been in a car accident. And Mara had been listed, still, as her emergency contact. A nurse in dark blue scrubs appeared. "Are you here for Jenna Reyes?" Mara stood so fast the plastic chair scraped the floor. "Yes. Yes, I'm her, I'm Mara." The nurse's face was unreadable. "She's stable. Broken collarbone, 2 fractured ribs, a concussion. She was lucky." Mara pressed her hand to her mouth. "Can I see her?" "She hasn't asked for you," the nurse said, not unkindly. "But she hasn't said no, either." Mara sat back down. She would wait. She didn't know how long she sat there. Time in hospitals moves differently, stretched and compressed at once. At some point, a man sat down beside her. Not a doctor. Not a nurse. He was wearing paint-stained cargo pants and a gray Henley rolled to the elbows. He had a smear of burnt sienna along his jaw, and his hands, when he pressed them together, were covered in dried color. He didn't look at her. He just pulled a battered paperback from his jacket pocket and began to read. Something about him made the room feel quieter. Mara stared straight ahead. She wasn't in the mood for company. But she was about to have it anyway. He turned the page of his book. Then, without looking up, he said, "You've been crying." Mara blinked. "Excuse me?" "Not right now," he clarified. "Hey," Mara managed. A pause that lasted 1,000 years. "You didn't have to come," Jenna said. "You still had me as your emergency contact." Jenna looked at the ceiling. "I never changed it. I kept meaning to." Mara stepped closer. "I'm glad you didn't." Jenna turned to look at her then. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. "You fired me in front of 11 strangers, Mara." "I know. You didn't even warn me." "I know." "Why?" Mara sat down in the chair beside the bed. She thought about what to say. She thought about the investors. The pressure. The headlines. She thought about the note her father left on the kitchen table. I wasn't built for this kind of life. Because I was terrified, she said finally. That if you stayed, you'd eventually leave me anyway. And I didn't know how to survive that. So I did it first. Silence. Then Jenna exhaled, a long, broken sound. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I know. I was never going to leave. I know that now. More silence. Then, very quietly, Jenna said, "You should have just told me you were scared." Mara pressed her fingers to her eyes. I didn't know how. The machines beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and was answered. Mara, Jenna said, and her voice was soft now. Careful the way a person is when they're still deciding something. I don't know what comes next. I'm not saying everything is fine. I'm not asking for fine, Mara said. I'm asking for the chance to try. Jenna looked at her for a long time. Then she reached out her uninjured hand. And Mara took it. She found Caleb still in the waiting room when she returned. He was on his last page. She okay? He asked without looking up. Going to be, Mara said. She picked up her bag. Then she stopped. Why are you still here? He finally closed the book. I wasn't sure you'd have somewhere to go after. She stared at him. That's a strange thing to say to someone you met 3 hours ago. Probably, he agreed. She laughed then, really laughed, for the first time and she couldn't remember how long. Are you always like this? She asked. Like what? Inexplicably kind to crying strangers? He stood, tucked the book into his pocket. My sister would have wanted someone to be. Mara's throat tightened. Outside, the night air hit them both, cool, slightly damp, carrying the faint smell of late summer in the city. Traffic lights blinked in the empty street. A few cabs idled at the corner. I haven't eaten a real meal in about 20 hours, Mara said. I know a diner, Caleb said. 2 blocks east. Open all night. The eggs aren't fancy, but they're real. She hesitated. Old Mara would have said no. Old Mara would have gotten in a car, checked her phone, drafted 3 emails before she hit the lobby of her building. But old Mara had fired her best friend in a conference room and spent 14 months pretending it hadn't hollowed her out. Okay, she said. The diner was called the Bright Spoon. Red vinyl booths. A jukebox that actually worked. A tired-looking cook behind the counter who nodded at Caleb like he was a regular. They ordered eggs, toast, coffee that was somehow better than it had any right to be. Caleb told her about his sister, Maya, her laugh, her fear of escalators, the way she used to make pancakes into the shapes of states she'd never visited. Mara told him about her father's note. She had never told anyone about it. Not Jenna. Not her mother. Not the therapist she'd seen twice and then stopped calling back. She said it out loud to a stranger in a diner at midnight and it came out lighter than she expected. Like something had been waiting to be said. Caleb listened the way some people don't, without planning his response while she spoke. Without glancing at a phone. Without steering the conversation back to himself. He just listened. And when she finished, he said, Do you still have it? The note? Yes. Have you ever written back? She blinked. He's been gone for 20 years. That wasn't the question. She looked at him across the table, she heard him exhale. Something like relief. Something like grief. Okay, he said. I'll be here. She hung up. Her hands were steady. That Sunday, Caleb picked her up in his truck. He drove her to a park she'd never been to, small, tucked between buildings on the east side, with a fountain and old oak trees and a man selling roasted chestnuts from a cart. They sat on a bench. He handed her a chestnut. She held it between her palms, feeling the warmth. "I want to tell you something," he said. "Okay." "I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," he said. "For the hospital. For the diner. For any of it. I didn't do those things because I wanted something back." "I know that," she said. "But," he continued, and he turned to look at her. "I also can't pretend that I'm not." He stopped. Started again. "I think about you. Constantly. And I'm not someone who says things I don't mean." She looked at him. This man who had sat beside her in a plastic chair and offered her pretzels she didn't ask for. This man who listened like it was sacred. Who smelled like paint and old books and coffee. Who visited a hospital because it held a piece of someone he loved. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah? I think about you too." He looked straight ahead for a moment. Then a slow smile. "Good," he said simply. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The fountain murmured. The leaves moved. And something that had been broken in Mara Quinn for a very long time began, quietly, to mend. He never left. Not when Bridgewell went through its restructuring. Not when Mara's article came out in the Times, an interview where she publicly apologized to Jenna and acknowledged her failures of leadership. Not when the comments online were vicious. Not when her father's letter arrived, handwritten and shaky, 3 pages long, full of regret and too late love. Caleb read it with her. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand while she cried for the father she'd wanted and the man he had not been able to be. He kept showing up. Bringing coffee. Listening. Making space in his studio, in his life, in himself. Not because she was a CEO. Not because of Forbes or Bridgewell or the billion-dollar valuations. Because she was Mara. And she was finally letting someone see that. 6 months after the hospital, Jenna Reyes came back to Bridgewell. Not in the same role. A new one. One she designed herself. Chief of People and Culture, a position that had never existed before, because Mara had never thought to create it. Now she did. On Jenna's first day back, Mara met her at the elevator. No speech. No cameras. Just 2 women who had been through the wreckage of their own friendship and chosen to come back. "Ready?" Mara asked. Jenna looked at her steadily. "Are you?" Mara smiled. "I'm learning." Jenna pressed the elevator button. "Then let's go." On the anniversary of Maya's passing, Caleb and Mara went back to the hospital. Not to the waiting room. To the courtyard behind the building, where someone had planted a small garden with a bench and a plaque for patients who had spent long seasons there. They brought flowers, wild ones, the kind Maya had kept in jars on her windowsill. They sat for a while without speaking. Then Mara said, "Tell me about the card trick nurse." Caleb laughed softly. His name was Gerald. He could make a whole deck disappear in his palm. Maya called him the Great Gerald every time he came in. Did he know she called him that? She told him, Caleb said. Loudly. Every visit. Mara smiled. She sounds like someone who didn't waste a moment. Caleb looked at the flowers. She wasn't, he said. She really wasn't. He reached over and took Mara's hand. She squeezed back. Some losses don't close. They just become part of how you love. On a cold December evening, Caleb showed Mara a painting he'd been working on for 4 months. She stood in front of it for a long time. It was her. Not posed. Not glamorous. Not the Forbes cover. It was her, in the plastic chair of a waiting room, paper coffee cup in both hands, eyes swollen, looking at nothing. Looking like a woman who had run out of armor and didn't yet know that was actually the beginning. "You painted this from memory?" she asked. "The night I got home," he said. "I didn't know why at the time." She looked at it. At the woman in the chair. At all the weight she'd been carrying that night and all the nights before it. She did not look broken. She looked human. "Caleb," she said quietly. "Yeah? I love you." He stepped beside her. Looked at the painting. "I know," he said. And then, softer, "I love you too. I've been painting you for months. It would have been strange if I didn't." She laughed so hard her eyes watered. And it was nothing like the cold, managed, boardroom version of herself she'd been maintaining for 11 years. It was just joy. Wild, unglamorous, completely unmanaged joy. Months later, on a night when they'd had a little wine and were sitting on Jenna's porch watching the street below, Mara finally asked, "Why did you still have me listed?" Jenna was quiet for a moment. The street lights flickered on. "Because even when I was furious at you," Jenna said, "you were still the person I'd want there if something went wrong." Mara looked at her. "That's either the most loving thing I've ever heard," she said, "or deeply alarming." Jenna pointed at her. "Both." It was absolutely both. They dissolved into laughter that moved through the warm evening air and scattered like something newly freed. A year after that night in the hospital, Mara sat in a conference room, different from the one where she'd handed Jenna a termination letter. This one was smaller. This one had plants on the windowsill because Jenna had insisted. This one had people in it who knew her name and also knew her actual laugh. She was presenting the company's new values framework. Not to investors. To her team. And in the document, the actual official company document, she had written, "At Bridgewell, we believe the work should never cost you the people who make it worth doing." She read it aloud. She meant every word. Afterward, Jenna found her in the hallway. "Your dad called the office," she said carefully. "Looking for you." Mara exhaled. "He can have my cell," she said. I think we're figuring it out." Jenna nodded. "Good," she said. "It's about time you stopped carrying that note alone." Mara looked at her, her best friend, her partner, the person she had almost destroyed out of fear. "How did you know about the note?" Jenna smiled. "I've known you for 15 years, Mara. I just waited until you were ready to tell me." Mara Quinn. You could still Google her. The headlines were different now. Bridgewell CEO restructures leadership with radical transparency. Mara Quinn on failure, friendship, and starting over. The CEO who said she got it wrong, and what she's doing about it. But what the headlines couldn't show was this. On Saturday morning she sat in the corner of Caleb's studio with a notebook and a window cracked. She had started writing, not reports, not memos, but letters. To her father. To Jenna. To herself at 24 with the broken coffee maker and the new company and the iron-hard certainty that love was a liability. She wrote until her hand ached. And when she was done, Caleb would make coffee, and they would sit together in the quiet Saturday light, and she would feel, not the breathless, desperate feeling of achieving something, but the slow, steady warmth of a life that was actually hers. Not the life her father ran from. Not the life the investors designed. Hers. Built from honesty, from forgiveness, from a stranger who sat beside her in a plastic chair and offered her pretzels she didn't ask for. She was still the woman who built the world. But now she knew what she had been building it for.